So what I'm going to be talking about initially is something that kind of plagues humans in general. I know that personally, this happens to me a lot. And what I'm talking about is the fact that we get easily distracted. I mean, everyone's had that before. It's easy to go about your day-to-day life and focus on something that really isn't that important. Whether it's, for me, it tends to be my coworkers who show up a bit later than I would. And so it doesn't affect me. I'm not hurt by the fact that they show up late, but for some reason it irritates me because it's not my work ethic. It doesn't matter though. That, like, me worrying about that won't change a single thing in my day-to-day life. It's just that it irritates me, so I fester on it. I'll pick on them because of it. I had a trainee come in late yesterday, and I asked him, "What time is it?" And he looked at me and said, "You have a phone, right?" And so it wasn't really ready for that, but that's what kind of happens when you poke into things that really don't change your life. I'm going to throw a number out there at y'all. I don't expect anyone to know it. If you do, awesome. If you don't, it's what I expect. It's 28,835. Any guesses to what that might represent?
It's a number.
It's a number. That's a good point. So the 28,000 seconds in the day, I heard that. It's not it, but that's close. 28,835 is the average amount of days an American will live. For those of us, for quick division, that's about 79 years of life.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, there's people here in this congregation who are beyond that, and there's people who are no longer in this congregation who didn't make it that far. But that is the average life expectancy of an American, 28,835 days.
Wow.
Some countries, they go as high as 85, 86. I don't think any country currently has an average years of 90. And there are some countries that go as low as 50 years of average. Which, that's always scary to me, because if the average is 50, that means there's enough people dying younger than that to pull that number down to 50. But 28,835 days is the amount of time you'll spend alive on average. You take about 5,475 of those days, that's about your first 15 years of life. And at this point, a lot of us, we might have had our first summer job, got our learner's permit, started driving. You're into high school, you're probably thinking about career choices. Some of us might have started dating at this time. You're making more adult decisions. Whether they're good or bad, I don't know, but you're starting to make more decisions for yourself at this point. On average, a person will sleep 8 hours a day. So you take that time, that's about 8,477 days you'll spend asleep.
Wow.
From when you're born to when you're, for that 79 years. 1,635 of those days will be spent eating, drinking, preparing food, getting stuff ready for meals. About 3,200 of those days, 3,202 of those days will be spent working, hopefully doing something you find fulfilling and a job that you are happy to have. 1,099 of those days will be spent driving, commuting to and from work, commuting to and from the grocery store, possibly more days if you live in somewhere like LA, but on average, 1,099 days.
But not 2,000 days.
Not 2,000. It's short.
1 day short.
Well, one day short of 1,100.
Oh.
991 days short of 2,000.
Yeah,
But you'll spend about 2,976 of those days watching TV or browsing social media, whether it's watching a movie, watching TV, checking Facebook, or trying to keep up with whatever's happening in the news. 1,057 of those days will be spent doing household stuff, like chores, cleaning, making sure the dishes are washed, doing your laundry, walking a dog. About 564 of those days will be spent caring for others, whether it's a child or it's an elderly relative who is in a home, trying to keep track of them and care for them. 671 of those days will be spent grooming or bathing or whatever else you may do in the bathroom. My hair always falls down, so I'm in there a bit longer. 720 of those days will be spent doing community stuff, as in coming to church, doing volunteer work, working at a soup kitchen, any of that type of stuff. And so at the end of all of that, what's left, and this is your free time, is 2,440 days, which is about 6.5 years. And so that means that in the grand scheme of what you do on your day-to-day life, you have about 6.5 years of time to learn how to play guitar, swim, hang out with friends, have dinner dates, anything like that. And if you told me today that I had 6.5 years left to live, I have no idea what I'd be doing. I don't know if I would stop working at Verizon, if I would walk my dog for longer. I don't know if I would hang out with certain people less or more. But 2,440 days are what we have as free time. And a lot of people, myself included, will spend that time worrying about things that won't matter. Worrying about things that won't change my life, that won't impact my life. Worrying about what someone said on a platform or what someone was doing, looking at things that don't need my attention. I know it's kind of like when you see a car accident and you want to look at it for a minute, trying to figure out who's at fault, why two cars are on the wrong side of the road. All that analysis that adds nothing to your life. So it's 2,440 days that I want to talk about. And we're actually going to turn with me, if you want to Judges 13 through 16. Which, if you're familiar with it, that is the story of Samson. Judges 13 through 16. I'm on the wrong page. I'm in 17.
You're on the wrong page?
There we go. 13 through 16. So just start at 13. You can't look at all of them at once unless you have a very small print Bible. But 13 through 16 is what we're going to be talking about. And Samson's always interested in me. So 13 kicks off. I love how it starts, actually, the 13:1. It says, "Again, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord." I love how the first word in that is again. It's like, okay, the children of Israel, we know about these guys. Guess what? They've messed up again. Here they go, betraying the word of God. And so it says, the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. And so the first chapter, it continues talking about how an angel of the Lord came to who would become Samson's mother and said, "You are a barren woman, but you're going to have a son. And I need you to do a few things to make sure this turns out right." And now, this kind of gives you a glimpse of how far off the Israelites were from what they were supposed to be doing. Because in verse 4 of 13, the angel of the Lord says, "Now therefore, please be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean." This would have been common sense for Israelites back in the day, because this was a part of the things they were told when they were first exodused from Egypt. They were given a bunch of tenets and rules to follow, and the fact that an angel of the Lord has to come down to an Israelite specifically and say, "Hey, do these to make sure your child turns out well," kind of gives you a picture of how far away the Israelites from what they had planned. And of course, the next thing that is mentioned is, "And no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazirite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hands of the Philistines." This is the one thing that set Samson apart, talking about Philistines. So it's the one thing that set Goliath apart from everybody is that he would never have a haircut ever. You cut his hair, the covenant's broken. And a little bit of historical context, at this time, Samson's story ends roughly 5, 10, or 15 years before Saul is anointed king. And so Saul might have grown up either hearing about Samson or being alive close to the same time. That's the window we're in. Because we all know that we get David and Goliath later where we defeat the Philistines, and that's that. And so this is kind of starting what would then happen to Saul and during David's time. And so it continues on talking about how the woman went back to her husband, and she was so excited. She said, "A man of God came to me, and his countenance was like that of a countenance of an angel. Very awesome. But I did not ask him where he was from. I forgot to ask some details, didn't ask him his name. I was just so excited because I haven't never had a child. I'm barren, and now we're going to have a child, and he's going to do some amazing stuff." So the husband says, "I'm going to pray to him and have him come back so I can talk to him to clarify some details, I guess." I don't know what the whole in-depth purpose of the husband saying, "I want to talk to him myself" was, but he prays to God. God sends the angel of the Lord back and says the same stuff. Make sure you're healthy while you have this child. Don't cut his hair. And it continues forward. They offer a young goat to God, and then fast forward, verse 25. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move upon him, being Samson, at Manaadam between Zorah and Eshtal. And so we don't get much of a picture between what Samson was doing when he was a child. I'm sure he got picked first for dodgeball all the time, because I'm sure he could throw one pretty hard. I don't know if he was a very obedient child. We don't see him being a very good person throughout his life. Because chapter 14 kicks off immediately with Samson doing something an Israelite would not do. Because it says, now Samson went down to Timnah and saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Israelites were not supposed to mingle, marry, really be with any woman who was not an Israelite, who was a Philistine, who was a heathen at the time. And so he sees this girl from Timnah who's probably wearing something not very appropriate and says, I want to marry her. Goes to his parents and says, Mom, Dad, I met this great girl. She probably doesn't know a lot, but I want to marry her. And they say, well, what about the Israelite women? Are there not daughters of the Israelites who are more interesting? It says, is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren or among all my people that you must get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson says, go get her for me. She pleases me well. She's good looking. That's all I care about. Surface level interest. She has pretty hair. She's got bright blue eyes, whatever he liked. And that was it. I don't know if she could hold a conversation. I don't know if she could cook or clean, but she was pretty, and that's all Samson cared about. And so it goes on further. So Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah. And this is the part where Samson gets attacked by a lion. He kills it. It says, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, which, I mean, lions are terrifying in general. Back then, I don't know if they were bigger. I mean, it's a lot earlier in Earth's history, so it might have had more time for stuff like that. But I don't know many people who could tear apart a lion like you would a young goat. So this lion attacks him, he kills it, and in its carcass there is a beehive, or what does it say? Yeah, a swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. And so he takes it, gives it to his parents to eat, kind of interesting, and continues forward. And he doesn't tell them where he got it. Now, one interesting thing about this part is that, because everyone generally knows some of the story of Samson. We know how it begins, we know how it ends. But one thing that's kind of, I've never heard mentioned before this, that earlier in 14 verse 4, when Samson first talks about wanting to meet this lady and marry her, it says, but his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines. For at that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. And so although this was not the best decision of Samson's life, this was part of God's plans of start moving against the Philistines. And so it continues forward, verse 10. So his father went down to the woman, and Samson gave a feast there, for young men used to do so. About this time, they're moving from whatever time they had to court, and now they're getting married. And so Samson sees a group of 30 men, wants to make him a bet, because he just killed a lion and found honey in it, so he's kind of feeling kind of full of himself. And so he goes to these 30 men and says, I want to pose a riddle for you. If you can guess it, I will give you, I believe it's 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. But if you cannot guess it, then you give the same to me. And his riddle is, out of the eater came something to eat, out of the strong came something sweet. As I read the story, and even if that was given to me, I probably wouldn't have known what it was, because no one expects honey to come out of a lion. And so they have no idea how to answer this riddle. This isn't your standard, like, riddles that you get from, like, kids' books. This is out of nowhere. He made it up. And so it says, now for 3 days they could not explain the riddle. But it came to pass on the 7th day that they said to Samson's wife, so now he's already married this woman. I guess that feast kind of officiated that. And they say, entice your husband that he may explain the riddle to us, or else we will burn you and your father's house down. Have you invited us in order to take what is ours? Is that not so? And so it says in 16, then Samson's wife wept on him and said, you only hate me. You do not love me. Oh my goodness, you are the worst husband ever, because you won't tell me this riddle that you've posed against my people, and now they hate me. And so explain this to me. And this is kind of like a mirror image of what's going to happen later between him and Delilah. And so she's complaining, saying, you don't tell me anything. And he says, I haven't even told my parents the answer to this riddle, so why on earth would I tell you? And so it continues. And then it says on verse 17, now she wept on him the 7 days while their feast lasted. And it happened on the 7th day that he told her because she pressed him so much. She was getting so annoying that Samson said, okay, I'm going to tell you if you'll just stop asking me. I'm going to tell you the answer to this so you can just go away and give me some peace for a few minutes. And so he tells her the answer, and immediately she runs off to the Philistines, gives them the answer. They come back to Samson and say, hey, we figured it out. What is sweeter than honey and what is stronger than a lion? And Samson responds, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle. So he's upset because he kind of fell into his own temptations. He was using his free time, those 2,440 days of free time, and burning it on something that should not be important, giving out riddles and giving out answers. And so because they guessed this, he goes down to a town. It says, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. He went down to Ashkelon and killed 30 of their men, took their apparel, and gave the changes of clothing to those who had explained the riddle. So he loses the bet. And so to fulfill the bet, he goes down to a town in the Philistine Empire, because the Philistine Empire was, I think, 5 different cities at this time period. Goes down to one of their towns, kills 30 other men, takes their clothes as payment, and then gives them to his debtors. And it says, so his anger was aroused, and he went back to his father's house. And this kind of also paints a picture of how loose the Philistines were, and when it came to like commitment and whatever rules they had. It didn't seem like they had much. Because now we're in chapter 15. After a while, in the time of wheat harvest, it happened that Samson visited his wife with a young goat. And he said, let me go into my wife, into her room, but her father said no. Because he still thinks this is his wife, but apparently at some point, it says, her father said, I really thought that you thoroughly hated her. I thought you hated your wife so much that I decided to give her to your companion, who we previously learned was his best man. But is not her younger sister more appealing? Do you want her instead? He said, I thought you hated her for betraying you, for stabbing you in the back, so I gave her to the next person. But how about you take the next person who is her sister, and all is forgiven? The Philistines didn't care. They thought this was fine. They thought that this would kind of roll with it. And so again, Samson is very angry. Verse 3, and Samson said to them, this time I shall not be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them. And this is when he catches 300 foxes. I don't know why, but when I was younger, I thought this number was smaller. I thought it was like 50 foxes, which is still a lot of foxes. But for it to be 300 foxes, because this isn't just a feat of strength, this is a feat of absolute patience. I can't imagine it's easy to catch a wild fox, let alone 300 of them. And so he catches all these foxes, ties them together, and then drops a torch on them, and has them run through the Philistines' crops, burning down everything in their path. They are laying waste to the Philistines' corn. I think it says things specifically, stocks of the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and olive groves. And so the Philistines are mad now. And one thing, again, that's interesting, remembering that 14 verse 4 where it said this was God's plan, is that this is all leading up to what he would do to the Philistines in this next few pages. And so Samson does this. The Philistines are very upset because their livelihood just got burnt to the ground. And so in retaliation, they want to kill Samson. And so it says that Samson, he says, I will surely take revenge on you, and after this I will cease. Right before this, they found out it was Samson, so they decided to kill his would-be or current father-in-law and the woman who was previously his wife. They burned them with fire because of what Samson did. And because of this, Samson, it says, so he attacked them hip and thigh, verse 8, with a great slaughter, and then went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock of Etam. Now the Philistines went up and camped in Judah and deployed themselves against Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why have you come against us? And so they answered, we have come to arrest Samson to do him as he has done to us. Philistines want Samson dead. He has killed over 30 of their people at this point. It doesn't say how much was in this great slaughter, but he's killed a bunch of people. And so they go to Judah, say, give us Samson. They say, we'll bring him to you. So they go to Samson, find out where he's hiding. They're like, the Philistines are here for you. we won't kill you, but we're going to take you to them. He makes them promise they're not there to kill him. He says, swear to me that you will not kill me yourselves. So they spoke to him, saying, no, but we will tie you securely and deliver you into their hand, but we're not going to be the ones who kill you. We're giving you to the Philistines to do with whatever they want. And this is where Samson starts to fulfill his purpose of delivering the Israelites from the Philistines. It goes down further and says, when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting against him. Then once again the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the ropes that were on his arms became like flax that is burned with fire. So they just basically burst on him. He broke his bonds. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey. The first thing, so he just broke out, surrounded by, we found out, 1,000 men. He breaks out of these bonds. First thing he finds on the floor isn't like, he doesn't kill one guy and take his sword. He finds a fresh donkey's jawbone and proceeds to kill 1,000 men with it. And then he sings a little jingle about it. With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men. So he just goes berserk on these people. He starts whittling them, one person against 1,000, and it doesn't say he comes out unscathed, but he's fine enough to continue on afterwards. And now, in verse 18, we see our first conversation between Samson and God. It's interesting that it's at this point, not previously when he was going through things, but after he has successfully overcome these 1,000 people with a donkey's jawbone, he prays to God. He reaches out to the Lord and doesn't say, thank you for helping me. I'm blessed to be your servant. He says, you have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised. He's like, great, you've given me this powerful, you have made me the first superhero on earth to have superhuman strength to kill 1,000 men by myself, but you can't even give me water. I am thirsty. I'm going to die. He's complaining. For whatever reason, but God follows through with that. It says, so God split the hollow place that is in Lehi, and water came out, and he drank, and his spirit returned, and he revived. Therefore, he names the place and continues on into our story of Samson. And now in chapter 16, heard someone say it. We finally meet Samson and Delilah, or we finally meet Delilah later on, but it kicks off again. It's very easy to find out what Samson's Achilles heel is, what kind of gets him to make bad decisions. Because 16 starts off the same way 14 did, with now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there. There isn't someone who wants to be his wife, it's just a woman who is a harlot. She's well known by men. She's a woman of the night, and went into her. And so she's a beautiful woman, spends the night with her. And so the Gazites found out and said, Samson has come here. Samson's in this city, so what we're going to do, we're going to surround the place and wait at the gate of the city. So they were quiet all night, saying, in the morning we're going to jump him, we're going to kill him. This man just killed 1,000 men by himself, but in the morning when he's sleepy, he just woke up, we're going to jump him and get revenge that we're deserved. But Samson woke up at midnight and left. But not only did he leave, he decided to pick up the entire gate. Samson lay low till midnight, took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 gate poles, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top hill that faces Hebron. And this is also the first time in our story of Samson that we don't see a feat of inhuman strength attributed to the Spirit of the Lord. Every time when he killed a lion, when he killed 1,000 men, when he fought earlier, it always attributed to the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him and making this thing possible. But for the first time, Samson does something that no human would regularly be able to do, puts an entire gate of a city on his back and walks it up a hill, and it doesn't say the Spirit of the Lord was there helping him with it. And so this is the first time that Samson's doing something that isn't relevant to his purpose. He's taken this amazing gift he has and kind of made it his own, because nothing in here, he did not have to do that. He could have just left at midnight, left the city, ran back home, done whatever else. Because it doesn't say he killed anyone. It just says that he took the gate, carried it up a hill, and that was it. The same gate that I guess these people were waiting at for him, for the morning. And so Samson's kind of recognized the ability he has finally, because he's able to kill 1,000 men by himself. he's recognized this and has decided that that is him. Because the first time he talks to God, he's just begging he's thirsty. So he's like, give me something to drink because I've done this. So shall I die here without a drink of water? And so Samson's kind of getting full of himself at this point. And again, afterward it happened that he had loved a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 silver pieces. So 5,500 silver pieces she's getting, because in that time there would have been about 5 lords of the Philistines. Each one had their own respective town, their own city, kind of like how kingdoms are divided under one net. And so crunching some numbers, silver is kind of an undefined amount of money, because there's a lot of different things mentioned throughout the Old Testament. There's shekels, gold, silver, just different things. But the closest I could find online was that this was about $14 million she was being offered to tell them how to kill a man that she really has no loyalty to. Because she's a Philistine, or at least she's with the Philistines. Samson comes to her because she's pretty, but they have no actual relationship there. It's just she's getting paid to betray a man she doesn't really care about. And she's fine with that. And so Samson, being the love-struck loser he ends up being, so she starts asking him, so how can we make you weak? Where does your strength come from? How can we take it away? Just asking for a friend. And he says, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, I'll become weak and like any other man. So they do this. She says, Samson, the Philistines are coming. He breaks out, fights, wins, he's fine. Second time comes along, because somehow the first time just didn't convince him that she wasn't trying to help him. In verse 10, she says, Delilah said to Samson, you have mocked me and told me lies. Now please tell me how we can bind you. He says, okay. If you bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I'll become weakened like any other man. Doesn't happen. Philistines, they do this to him, or she does it to him. She says, the Philistines are here. They come. He breaks loose, wins the day. Third time's the charm, right? And so one more time, she says, you have mocked me and you've told me lies, so why can't we kill you yet, essentially? She's like, I have betrayed you 2 times, but I just want to know your secret. Please just tell me. And so then he says, if you weave the 7 locks of my head into a web of the loom. It doesn't even say I'll become weak. It puts a little hyphen in my Bible because it's like, you know what's going to happen. And so they wove it. She says, the Philistines are upon you. He breaks free. He's perfectly fine. Nothing happens. And so finally, 4th time's the charm. It says, then she said to him, how can you say I love you where your heart is not with me? You have mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your strength truly lies. And so Samson was deceived by the fact that he wanted to believe Delilah's lies. Although he could strangle a lion, although he could kill 1,000 men, walk a gate up a hill, he could not handle a pretty woman and their lies at this point. He wanted so desperately to believe this because he just wanted some type of fulfillment. And so finally, as it says in verse 16, and it came to pass when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him, so that his soul was vexed to death, he finally told her. She was nagging on him all day, throughout the week, every day of the week, every waking moment, whether he was, I don't know what he was doing throughout the day, but she was nagging on him to the point where he said, okay, I'd rather be dead than hear you keep complaining to me, so I will tell you with all types of honesty how to make me weak. And so he says, cut my hair. I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak like any other man. And when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines. Delilah saw that he truly meant this. She saw in his eyes that this was absolutely his heart, his purest truth coming out of him. And so she runs off, tells the Philistines, collects her money, says, came up to her and brought the money in their hand. Then she lulled him to sleep on her knees, called for a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him and said, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. So he woke up and said, I will go out as before, at other times shake myself free. but he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. And that's why it's so important that we mention that he took those gates and it doesn't attribute that to the Lord, because the Spirit of the Lord left him and he had no idea. God said, you have broken the one thing I gave you to do, the one thing I told you not to do, and because of that, I have left you, and he didn't even notice. And Samson's kind of a rare case in the Bible, in the Old Testament in general, in the sense that he wasn't given a list of tenets, a bunch of do's. His life was nowhere near the ideal Israelite or Christian life. He was a womanizer. He fell to every woman he saw, and the only one thing he was given not to do was just don't cut your hair. Which at that time, there weren't hair salons. You couldn't get it all permed and pretty. And so that probably wasn't that hard of a thing to do. It said he had 7 locks, so he kind of had dreads. They were tied together, probably pretty tough. And he was told, do not cut these, and you will have inhuman strength. You can achieve any feat possible. And it's mentioned before, just don't cut your hair. And he has it cut, and the Lord leaves him. And then the Philistines took him and put out his eyes. And this is kind of a turning point for him, because up until this point, what was Samson's problem? It was the lust of the flesh. The fact that every pretty woman he saw that wasn't an Israelite, he chased after, and so the Philistines put his eyes out, which is a beautiful type of irony, because this is the one thing that kept leading him astray, and now he no longer has them. An eye for an eye. And so it continues that now he's their servant. The Philistines capture him. He became a grinder in the prison. And the lords of the Philistines get together, and they have a great party. They offer a sacrifice to their god Dagon and rejoice, saying, our God has delivered us Samson. Awesome. And then the people keep singing, our God has delivered us into our hands, our enemy, the destroyer of our land, and the one who multiplied our dead. Dagon has given us this terrible enemy. Amen. They're going nuts. They're throwing a party. And it says that when their hearts were merry, they said, call for Samson that he may perform for us. So Samson is in the thick of it now. He's in the heart of the Philistines' empire. All of the lords of the land are there to basically point and laugh at him and have him entertain them. And so then it says to Samson that he was being led by someone because now he is blind. And it says, let me feel the pillars which support the temple so I may lean on them. It says, now the temple were full of men and women, and the lords of the Philistines were there, about 3,000 men and women on the roof watching. And so at this point, we finally see in 28, it says, then Samson called the Lord, saying, O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me, I pray, just this once, O God, that I may with one blow take vengeance on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And from there, we know what happens. Samson ultimately ends up killing himself to take these Philistines with him, 3,000 it says. But in his last breath, he turned to God one last time, the only other time we hear him talking to God, and he says, let me die and take these Philistines with me. One more time, give me the strength to push this building down and kill my enemies for taking my eyes. It's not really a way a lot of us would want to go. I mean, yes, he ended up being a hero because of this, but if he died with it, he really didn't know if he succeeded. He prayed, God gave him the strength, and then he dies at that moment. It says they buried him in his father's household and took him, and he is a judge of Israel for 20 years. And I know multiple times at our Bible study, Richard has said that there's no atheist in a foxhole. That when it comes to a person's final moments, they reach out to God if they can. And Samson was lucky at this point. I know a lot of us don't look at it like that because he had his eyes put out, betrayed by every woman he fell in love with, and then was killed. He then killed himself by crushing a building on top of him, having it land on him. But he was lucky because in those final moments, he had the clarity to reach back out to God. That in those final moments, he was able to pray one last time and say, please, Lord, remember me, I pray. For vengeance, give me the strength just this once, O God, so I may deliver a final blow against the Philistines for abusing me. And there's not many people who get that chance when it comes to their final day. Because when you only have 2,440 days of freedom in your life to do whatever you want, 6.5 years, you really don't know how far along you are into those. I don't know if I've already burnt out a year of that, spending time doing whatever I want, being distracted, adding certain time to spending too much time at work because I think money is more important. I know a lot of times when people overwork themselves, they'll make excuses as to why they're doing it. It's like, oh, I'm doing this so that I can afford a better life for my family. But most of the time, your family would have a better life if you were just at home with them. Sometimes we spend more time adding to the household activities, adding more time to watching TV. We spend more time eating, drinking, or prepping food because we think that's more important than those free hours we need to do something else. And Samson spent, 2,439 of those days of freedom interacting with the wrong people, chasing after Philistine women who would not benefit him in any way. They would do nothing other than please him temporarily. And it took him that last day, that one day he had left, to make that commitment back to God. He said, I broke my vow when they cut my hair, but I need you one more time, this one last time, so I may fulfill my purpose. And it's those final moments that tend to be the scariest. I mean, I get busy throughout the day. This isn't just about God at this point. This is also about family matters. If you ask my mother about, she'd probably tell you I'm a hard person to get a hold of because I don't always answer calls like I'm supposed to. Sometimes I'll be eating and I'll see it ring and I'm like, oh, I'm eating. I'll just call her back later and then I forget for the rest of the night. I mean, I'm probably not the only person guilty of that, but it's a thing I have to admit just because that's part of what I've become, not who I am. Because really, when you boil it down, when it comes to God, I mean, who are we to tell ourselves who we are? I mean, it sounds kind of weird, but God defines us. We just live out his purpose. And there's those final moments where we really don't know who we're going to have another chance to talk to. See, Samson got lucky because he had one final chance to reach back out to God before he died. But no one knows their final day. Because I know it's never too late. And from any moment before now until now, that is true. It never was too late. But any moment from today into the future, it would be too late because we don't know what we get. So Samson was like that close to losing, to dying without God. He could have stayed with the Philistines and just been their slave, worked the mill. Maybe his hair would have grown back and things might have been fine. There wasn't really a rule set about whether his hair would grow back or not. It was just never cut his hair. So that kind of broke the rule forever until he made this commitment back to God. I'm going to offer my life to take the Philistines, so please give me my strength back. But we really don't know. And so if Samson had treated every day in his life as if it was that final moment, as if he would no longer be able to go back home, as if the Philistines were going to be constantly a problem, so he needed to stay alive and protect his people throughout his entire life, things might have been different. I don't truly know how God thought Samson was going to die, how God planned this out, but it still followed through with God's purpose. He might have been meant to judge Israel for more years. We don't know. It just says he was a judge for 20 years and that he died when he dropped this temple on 3,000 people. And so today is the Sabbath. And that's important because you should always treat it like it's going to be your last one. It's the same thing with Father's Day tomorrow. Sometimes you just have to treat it like it's going to be your last one. Because you never know when you'll have your last moment to talk to God, to ask for forgiveness, to come back to him and say, I know I broke every promise I was supposed to make to you, and I'm sorry for that. Just be with me this one last time. Because on your deathbed, you don't know what kind of state you're going to be in. You might not even have a deathbed. You could be hit by a car. I know it sounds brutal, but it's honest. You get knocked out of the sky. You could be flying in a plane to somewhere on a vacation, and that plane could drop. You sincerely don't know. So not all of us will be as lucky as Samson. And so I just want to say, please treat this Sabbath like it's your last.